Welcome to the Field Dynamics podcast. We're here to facilitate inspiring dialogues about the nature of consciousness across disciplines, communities, and practitioners, all with a holistic perspective.
From energy healing to somatic therapies, from neuroscience to meditation, we believe the most interesting things happen at the boundaries of disciplines.
I'm Christabel.
And I'm Keith.
Thanks for joining us today and enjoy the episode. Hello and welcome to the Field Dynamics podcast. Today we have with us as guest Jim Gilkeson. Jim Gilkeson is an author, teacher, craniosacral therapist, and musician living in Ashland, Oregon. After attending university in the late 1960s, he was a brother in a Christian mystical order for 9 years. He dates his involvement with energy healing back to 1972, when he first laid hands on another person with healing intent. He has taught workshops on energy healing and meditation in the United States and Europe since 1983. Jim's books on energy healing include A Pilgrim in Your Body, Energy Healing and Spiritual Process, 2009, and Energy Healing, A Pathway to Inner Growth, 1999. He has a practice in Davis, California, and Ashland, Oregon, and teaches classes on energy healing in massage schools in Davis and Ashland. Jim's latest book is 3 Lost Worlds, a memoir of life among mystics, healers, and life artists, to be published in the fall of this year, 2022. Welcome, Jim. Thanks for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you here.
I appreciate the invitation.
Firstly, we wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about that very first occasion in 1972 that we just mentioned there in the bio, when you first laid hands on another person with healing intent.
I was in the psych unit of a hospital, visiting a person who had been admitted there. And I'm not sure why I started doing it, but he was half asleep. And I just placed my hands in his energy field close in and moved them in his energy field. And A, he could feel it. B, my intention was basically healing, but I didn't know what I meant by that. I don't know. I found myself doing that and understanding that it was a thing. And he came to and told me he felt it. There's something about that was significant to me. There was a response. More than that, it wasn't, but it was a start.
Jim, I'm wondering, seeing as how you're a subtle energy practitioner and also have lots of bodywork background that, of course, works physically as well, why do you think people should be paying attention to their energy field?
I don't know. I don't know if that's going to be a thing for everybody, but because when you add energetic connection to what you're doing, you're kind of opening up another can of worms. As far as person's project, you're not really just in the zone of, in a way, helping parts of a person go through a change. When you make an energy connection, you're getting in touch with the whole thing. It's sort of like moving to, and to put it technically, to moving to a holographic level of organization as opposed to parts. And so I think there's a sort of a shift that goes on, has to, at least in a person's understanding, if they're going to use energy practices, that other things are going to get moving than simply symptom management. Yeah. So there's a big difference. So whether they should pay attention to it or not, I'm not the one to say, but I do know that different things happen when you do.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And as you said, it opens up a whole can of worms, right? So in your books, you've mentioned about how you can't seem to divorce getting involved with subtle energy practices and general spirituality. Could you comment a little bit about that, how you see the two as being intimately or intrinsic to one another?
Well, I think with energy healing or energy work tools, you've got psychospiritual tools that, they help a healing process, but they get at the background. It seems like with energy stuff, you start getting the background coming into the foreground of a person's psyche. That's one of the features that I think a person, in a way, sooner or later gets used to. But at first, sometimes, it's the can of worms that gets opened. And so I think you've got a psychospiritual tool, you got something that I think traditionally in the history of energy work has been more associated with spiritual transformation, with spiritual initiation, with what happens in the depths of a person's soul and psyche. And then, the use of it in symptom management, I think has been a kind of a more recent development, or has been kind of appropriated for that, and certainly congruent with it, but it really brings up other dimensions. And so, ultimately, I don't think we can get away from the spiritual aspect, or whatever you want to call it. I'll call it psychospiritual. They relate to prayer, meditation, contemplation. And I think that the energy practices, at least the way I've approached them, has certainly related to those very much. And that was my first entry into energy work.
Talking about energy practices, Jim, and how you approach them, you've talked about being fortunate as to have had various teachers and role models, none of whom insisted that you do things their way. It's allowing you to grow into a teacher and practitioner in your own right. How important has that personal volition, that sense of not being ascribed to a single specific modality, been in your development as a healer? And to backtrack a little bit as well, I think we'd love to hear a little bit more about what energy healing from your perspective is, what somebody experiences when they come to you for a session.
Well, I think I'll answer the first thing first. Is I guess what they experience is kind of a mashup. I have training as a craniosacral therapist, which blends very well with energy stuff. I've had training in other modalities like zero balancing, which is not as well known as craniosacral, but to me, it's what they have in common is that it works kind of at the interface of the physical body and the energy movement through. And so you've got a little bit of a foot in both worlds. I say that I don't know what people experience, what typically they'll get very relaxed and their internal process gets to move. If there's energy blockage that changes, then of course other things can start happening. If there's a physical problem, then oftentimes, let's say physically or emotionally, there will be some form of release of excess energy that's been getting in the way, gumming up the works. And then really it's according to what their internal process is and their own healing process. The things that come forward are much more in line with that. And that's what I'm trying to work with when I work, as opposed to run a protocol or try to predetermine what it is. So I kind of come down on the side of trying to treat what I find and work with the person's internal process, let that guide me. Teacher-wise, I think that comment about being happy to have run into teachers who let me, basically it comes down to this. I finally had a teacher who said, you got to learn to trust the authority of your own experience. And that meant the world to me, because I'd come out of a spiritual order where, like a lot of them, you kind of you line up with a teaching. And so I was very reluctant at one point to really trust my own experience. And then I have this encounter with this person who's basically saying you might have to kind of set that aside. Because I think, too, energy work is a very experiential kind of process. And so you have a lot of experience coming up. And I think what I learned from the teacher I'm thinking of is how to generate experiences that are genuinely my own and learn from them. Because I know people who've been, doing that kind of thing, and they've taken it off in completely other directions, artistically and creatively, and other aspects of healing work, So I felt like at one point I got a green light to go and, develop my own thing. I'm very thankful for that. It's made all the difference in the world, as opposed to following a template.
So I'm curious, Christabel and I both saw you for session work going back about 4 years ago.
I know it's been a while.
Yeah, and we had great experiences in our session work with you. I'm curious because many of our listeners are people who are somewhat familiar, let's say, with healing work or studying or training, or at least curious. And what's a session like with you as a practitioner? What are you going in and starting with? So somebody comes in and what happens? Kind of take us through the A to Z of how you approach connecting to the person, figuring out what's going on. And if you could, as just a secondary, just your sensing. We're curious about how is it that you're sensing energies, that we have the classic ESP kind of model, or what is it? How are you gaining or gleaning that information?
Well, I like to sit down face to face with the person coming in, and start with something like, what are you coming in for? I like to listen to how people describe what's going on with them, because they'll describe, they might give me a physical diagnosis, but just as often they'll start talking about what is on their mind, and it starts typically with symptoms of some kind. But I have found that if you just listen, you start getting this, more things start to come out. So I don't know, I listen to them. I'm listening to see if themes arise, if they are themes that seem to have something to do with a place on their body. Okay, that shows up. And I find myself kind of in my mind just saying, well, where are the most hits happening? If they're talking about 12 different things, what is it that brings them together? So I get a sense by talking with them what sort of orientation there is in this person, what constitutes a problem. It can get very, I don't know, I'd say mapped out on their body. And because a person might be talking about some theme, let's just take a garden variety thing like expression, right? I'm listening to their voice. I'm listening to how they hold themselves, and I see how they hold themselves. I see what they're doing with their voice and with their sound, Sometimes it's pointing to areas that are held. It's pointing to areas that have some kind of organization in a certain way, like around a trauma. And you get a nose for stuff like that. So when they finally lie on the table, I do my own little brand of scanning in. I use my hands. I typically get some kind of internal sense. It's a little like dowsing. Energy, where energy is compressed together inside a person from a trauma, oftentimes there's too much energy in one place and it's not going anywhere. And so that creates a magnetic field. I've taught myself to zero in on that. It's similar to what the craniosacral people call arcing. It gets so that's fairly reliable. And when that starts matching up with things that people described or what I intuit, then I got a pretty good starting place and work from there. And I've got my own little bag of tricks that I do with that. Getting it between my hands, moving with the micro movements of their body, giving that excess energy someplace to go. Because if it can start flowing again, a whole lot of things can change. And so I keep it pretty simple and try to follow their process. And oftentimes I find that process has a beginning, middle, and end. My hope and intention is that it would be something that can have its arc inside of the hour of time we're spending together. And it usually does.
There's a beautiful few paragraphs, Jim, in Energy Healing that talks of the healer's predicament. You rather humorously, although I would say accurately, describe how many of those seriously drawn to spiritual development often have their hands full in trying to marshal different aspects and dimensions of life that the majority of people are not even aware of. You go on to say that the most effective healers and adepts are those that have learned to manage themselves, to sort out their spiritual gifts and dedicate themselves to service. I wondered if you could talk a little bit to this, because there's many people that look to train with field dynamics or are seeking a training that works for them. And I think it feels like a very important point that you're reaching to there.
I find that as I've gone along over the years, that my idea of what I'm doing has changed a lot of times. And I kind of predict that with everybody who gets going seriously. So you enter in with one set of ideas about what you're doing. And I get this all the time in massage schools, because I'm seeing people on, let's say, I watch certain people at least on a similar trajectory. They know they've got some kind of relationship to touching people, for example, or some relationship to energy. And because there's no cultural definition for it, they're kind of making up their own thing. And so it takes a while to get a sense that you're not crazy, so to speak, and that you really do have a limited resource in the culture for it. And so you have to start learning from your experience and trusting it. That's a big step. For me, it was about taking it beyond a kind of religious spirituality to something that was more, I don't know, personal to me. Because I think in many cases, and probably people coming to you, and I see this with certain people who come to classes where I teach, they're dealing with something that's part of their calling. It won't let them not do it, but they don't know what it is. And you find people really either kind of trying to square it with their traditional understanding of the world. So anyway, there's this whole process of getting acclimated to the fact that you're dealing with energy and you're dealing with something that's off the grid of most people and that it's real anyway. And then practice getting your hands on people, practice learning meditative things, how to do it. God, there's a whole kind of weird apprenticeship that goes on. There are some predictable phases, and they go right along with the way people learn anything. I think there's a period when people go through, they get kind of a feeding frenzy going with regard to learning techniques and tools. And they really believe that the techniques and tools are the thing. And then after a while, they get too many techniques and tools and they don't know what to do. So they have to get an approach. And that's when they have to start finding out what they believe about what they're doing. And to me, that's very predictable. in watching how students go at it, especially in bodywork schools. But after a while, you get your approach and you get your feeling for why you're doing it, and what you're giving to the world through that.
Is there a most common obstacle, Jim, that you experience with students coming to the trainings, whether it's the craniosacral, the energy healing? Appreciate they're all coming from different backgrounds, but is there something that stands out to you as being a commonality in their development?
Specifically with energy healer types, energy healing is way out still on the periphery of what massage schools do, bodywork schools. It's kind of in, so everybody's got their token energy work class in massage schools. Okay, they're going to have Reiki, or they're going to have some form of it. After a person goes through the bodywork school, massage school training, and when really what they want to do is energy healing, and then they find themselves where? In a spa, or doing work where everybody says they want. What do they want? Deep tissue massage. Okay. And what I'm pointing out here is that gets to be this like little train wreck that goes on with the energy healer types when they get into the massage profession. If they haven't really kind of defined what they themselves do, and at that stage it's very rare, then they get into this thing about trying to put what they most deeply feel into a symptom management deep tissue paradigm that basically is a soft medical model. It's a soft medical model that is basically about symptom management. And they're involved internally with tools and practices with energy work that are much more about psychospiritual development and growth. In a way, that's my favorite time to get with students, is when they're having that train wreck, because it's a moment of self-definition and self-reinvention that I think is part and parcel of doing energetic work.
Yeah, you mentioned that about this redefining the world and having to kind of break out of preconceived notions, let's say. I'm curious, what comes to mind when you might apply that to your own journey? You were in a mystical order for a number of years, and then you found yourself doing these other things in the world of bodywork and energy work. Did you go from a religious spirituality to a universal spirituality, or how would you describe that? And what are like seminal experiences you had in that unfolding?
Getting sick was, I was in the order I was in Germany at the time. I got sick, and a number of people in the order were going to this healing center in southern Germany, and thought, well, okay, maybe I'll go down there, because I was off work. I couldn't do what I was ordinarily doing, so I had this time when I stepped out of my usual daily thing and went to this healing center. It was a doctor, and it was down in the world of anthroposophic medicine, the whole corner of Germany that has a lot of Rudolf Steiner activity. And so I went to the healing center, and at my intake with the doctor, there's this other woman sitting in the corner meditating. And nowadays we'd say that was a medical intuitive, but we weren't using that term at that time. And between the doctor and this medical intuitive, they put together a kind of a treatment plan. So it was like a big opening for me into acupuncture and homeopathy and related things, and energy healing. And this medical intuitive gave me energy healing sessions. Okay. And I'm thinking, I could do this. And it was really amazing kind of what kind of state I got into. So I had this little entrance into it. And long story short, I ended up leaving the order, and she and I got married. And this was let's say, my big entrance into energy healing. And so it was like a swerve from my prior life. I think that the things I learned in basically what was a spiritual school, as far as inner disciplines and so on, really stood me in good stead. But then the whole business of doing things with my energy field on purpose became another layer that built on, let's say, the spiritual schooling I'd had. And all of that turned into, a real need to sooner or later find my way in that. And I was introduced then to a teacher who, like I was saying before, really kind of put the onus on me to find my way with it, recognizing I had certain, leaning toward that, certain talent toward it, but it had to be developed. So that kind of thing comes to mind.
Thanks for sharing, Jim. It was very nice to hear that personal aspect of your story. You mentioned a principle that Keith and I both align with as well. It's not so much the healer doing the healing, rather they help trigger another person's healing potential, or as we put it in field dynamics, the healer doesn't heal. Could you go into this a little bit more detail? It seems like a really key principle, particularly in the subject of energy healing and that relationship as practitioner, the status of healer, and the egoic relationship to the work.
Yeah, I go with the word facilitator because of what it really means. It means to make something easy, facile. If a person was a midwife, they don't delude themselves by thinking that this is my baby. You're helping, you're making the process easier, but it's not your process exactly. And I don't know, I look at other people's processes as really being kind of in the driver's seat. And I think what I can bring to a healing process is bring a little boost in awareness and an ability to follow the process. And, that takes the heat off. You don't have to get into this whole business of being a healer. That's sort of overrated, really. Yeah, and like you point out, it gets into a very ego-driven sort of thing. And I find I'm in a much better position to do what I feel I'm here to do when I meet a process, when I acknowledge it, when I meet it and able to touch it. I don't have a lot of technique, and and I remember I used to have a lot of technique. But it's more of a human process of touching what's happening, not being afraid of it, but not trying to make it do something. I think what's important is respect and an ability, just a willingness to meet it and be with a person when they're going through something. And because people go through their knot holes internally. And it's a very important thing to not do it alone. A lot of trauma is because they were alone, and meeting that and being with a person when they go through something internally is, I think, a very important thing. And that comes up a lot in hands-on sessions. They might start with a physical something, but it oftentimes goes to something that is in the background that is of a traumatic nature. And that's where presence is really, really what it's about. I don't know if there are any techniques for presence. You can't just do presence. You can, in a way, be present. And I think that's been one of the gifts of doing exercises and having a regular practice and doing all that. But it's, I don't know, it's what I call an experiential value to be right here and be present with what's happening.
Ties into that idea, Jim, that you've mentioned of healing at its best and its most elegant, taking place with the tiniest of nudges, as opposed to the dynamite stick.
Yeah. Oh God, I wrote that a long time ago. It's true. I think the craniosacral work was a great big revelation for me as far as hands-on, very, very non-forcing, light touch kinds of work. I have a lot of respect for what happens at the very kind of micro movement level in a person's body, because you're right there at the cusp of physical structure and energy movement. And seems like a lot goes on there. And just being in there, touching, connecting, and meeting, and adding a little awareness to it can do a whole lot to make it easier for a process to take its step. And again, it's midwifery. It's not being the one that causes the process. So the little tiny nudges, a little nudge can be something like touching, just putting your awareness in your finger and touching. You can do a lot by just being present in your touch. And so these are what I mean by tiny nudges. As opposed to the dynamite sticks. I never liked the dynamite stick approach. I never liked it when people tried to dynamite stick me. I'm not that kind.
You introduce many people to working with the energy field, whereas they might be used to working physically. So I'm wondering, how do you initially help people to kind of imagine, think of, create kind of a framework around working energetically versus physically? How do you introduce them to that?
Oftentimes, what we'll do is I think of it as sort of somato-energetic practices. First thing, getting so that a person can be comfortable in their body. And a lot of these exercises that I teach have to do with connecting with a location on the body. And it really could be anywhere, but also it could be places that I would call energy active positions in their body, where basically you get a feeling connection with, for example, center your palm. Yeah, all these healer types, they've got fairly active hands anyway. So if you bring your attention to the center of your palm and simply get a feeling connection for the center of your palm, it's like feeling your nose kinesthetically, or your right ear, or your right big toe. Okay, we can connect kinesthetically with our body. And that's what I would call a feeling connection. And then there's just a trick I learned a long time ago, is if you can get a feeling connection and then relax your attention a little bit, so they're not concentrating, not fixing their attention in one place, but rather their attention is a little bit loose. If you can get your attention a little bit loose, then what starts to happen, you're feeling connection, but you're loose. That allows your attention to be drawn into the energy activity, like the center of your palm. You learn to give it time, so you get a feeling connection, you relax your attention, and then you go into neutral. Basically, you're not trying to make anything happen, and you're not trying to keep anything from happening. So basically, that's how I approach it. And what starts to happen, the feeling connection is necessary. You need to feel what you're doing. But then if you can relax it, the energy movement will draw your attention into itself. This is to me kind of a key thing. It'll draw you into a deeper connection with your energy system than you would get if you fixed your attention in one place and try to concentrate. Okay, so there's this kind of little art of how to relax your attention so that you're drawn into the activity. So this works really all over your body, but if you were to apply that to a chakra, if you apply that to an acupuncture point, you can teach yourself to be drawn into the energy movement like that. So it's very experiential. And it's, people find they can do that, and they start having different kinds of experiences. And then farming those experiences is what happens. Then if there's some teaching to be done about, well, what happened? Oh, I don't know what happened. Nothing happened, but I had this dream. Oh, okay. Nothing happened, but I had this feeling, or I remembered this. Okay, well, this is stuff that happens when you connect with your energy field, especially when it draws you in and kind of stirs things up, and you start to change. Things change. But so that's kind of how I go about it. People working with themselves. And then there's a carryover into hands-on work, but we do it parallel. We do it parallel because it's not just about external techniques that you do on other people. It's about something that gets moving in yourself. And I found that that's kind of the sort of in a nutshell how I approach it.
You've mentioned, Jim, that healing requires both intuition and rational knowledge. Given that you train people as we do, might you expand on that idea a little bit, balancing these two aspects of development?
Your intuition is going to use your knowledge base. It's like intuition needs a pull to move toward, Otherwise, you get a flash in the pan, aha, and then it's gone. But if you have a base of knowledge of science, for example, or of the anatomy of the body, your intuition is going to use that. You'll have a sense, back to, for example, scanning in to the body. I have found, at least in my case, that knowing some anatomy, it seems to be something that my intuition can make use of, just how things relate to one another. I think yes to the interplay between them. There's something to be said for knowing something. And this is why, I really like that. We've got two sides of a brain for a reason. Our ability to learn happens on a lot of levels. So I like learning. I like learning the names of things. I like learning the history of it. I like learning something about the how have other people done this? I maybe went through a time of thinking, oh, this is just exclusive to me, but it isn't. It isn't. We're doing stuff that has been going on for a long time. There's a long, long tradition of this kind of exploration. And it's interesting to find out who my grandfathers and grandmothers and brothers and sisters are in this kind of thing, Yeah, I mean, there is a community of sorts around this in terms of the deep history of energy healing.
Jim, I'm wondering, what's your personal practice look like on like a daily basis? What kind of things are you employing to maintain, your health, wellness, spiritual development, etc.?
I go back to some basic energy exercises that I do. I mean, I'm often up at 5. If I feel like it's been a good night's sleep, if I'm awake if I sleep through until dawn. I really like getting up at that time, and I sit, and I got either if I wake up and I'm working on something, then I have, let's say I'll have exercises that deal with that. Otherwise, I sit and kind of scan and see if I'm drawn into something in my body. That's the way things work. Like this morning, I was up 5:30. It was nice and clear, but I had all this stack up of energy in my right sacroiliac joint. And I thought, oh, what's that about? If that's about anything, because it really is on my radar. So I did what I just described. I just dropped my awareness in there, and allowed myself to be drawn into it. And that's something that's developed over the years, is trusting what happens when I do that. And it got bigger and bigger, and I got more and more uncomfortable. And then I started working with it. And I'm just giving an example of how I might approach that. And then I find the opposite side of my sacrum. Tell me if this is too much information, but I basically find the place on the other side of my sacrum and see what's going on there. And I toggle back and forth between the two. And this is just me kind of working with myself. And after a while, the side that was loaded up with energy starts to release, and the other one there kind of comes on board, and they come back into balance. And then I see, where else does that lead me? So I kind of move around my system like that, and kind of working freehand internally. But other times there are structured exercises that I like to do, and I have some pet exercises. And then I go outside, and I've got a maple tree, this big leaf maple out back that I made friends with when we first moved here. It's just finally leafed out. And so I sit in place and just kind of tune into this tree. It really is a living picture of up in the crown of the tree, the trunk of the tree, and the roots. And they seem to be really available to me. I never get tired of hanging out with that and kind of scanning this tree internally. And it was quite nice. It reminded me of something. I mean, this morning's experience with it was really quite nice because of the moving between heaven and earth in this tree is hindered by fear and is helped by love. And I could find my own personal body and energy field equivalent of that, you know? And so that was, for example, this morning's practice. So, it varies. Some days I just, conk out. Other days I do it, but I try to make sure that I do something, It's like not important what you do, but that you do something oftentimes, and kind of wake up and tune in and say, here I am. So that, something can, you're opening a door for something. So, I mean, that's kind of where I go these days. I've had a lot of times when it was prayer in the morning, or yoga in the morning, or meditation in the morning, or nothing in the morning, or go sit under the tree in the morning. But I don't know. I've had some kind of daily practice that in the morning and a couple of times a day. And it seems to fill up, inform what else goes on. And, I kind of operate like that.
It's really interesting to hear you reflect there, Jim, on how daily practices change over time, different eras and decades.
Oh God, yes. Yeah. Otherwise they get boring. If they get boring, you got to change something. It shouldn't be boring.
We mentioned in the opening bio your latest book, 3 Lost Worlds, which is being published in the fall. And of course, we're very aware that you teach energy healing and craniosacral classes in various places. Would love to mention your website, jimgilkeson.com. Is there anything else you'd like to share with the listeners around future opportunities of working with you or your plans?
I'm going through what a lot of people go through when they're 72 and saying, how long am I going to do this? And, the pandemic kind of did something to my concept of having a practice. As things stand right now, I teach a couple of places. I teach at the Ashland Institute of Massage a couple of times a year at least. And I teach at Massage Therapy Institute in Davis, California. I have a small practice both places, but it's very narrow gauge. It's expandable when there are people, collapsible when there are not. And so I'm in practice still. I am teaching still. I was teaching the craniosacral program at the school in Davis, and as of the end of this year, I'm not any longer. It's all going to be just energy healing classes. And so, gosh, I'm pretty available, but I'm not very active right now. I feel like, I spent the pandemic writing. This new book is about to come out, and so I'm hustling around with that. So beyond any of that, what I've liked most in the last 10 years is mentoring individuals in small groups and people. What I was describing before about this transition from massage school bodywork paradigm to energy healing paradigm as a practice. I really like working with people who are in that space. And when I meet people who are coming for mentorships, and I've done quite a few now, that has been where I'm centered now. And so people in that category, those are the people I would like to meet at that particular time in their trajectory.
Yeah, wondering, Jim, as we kind of come to conclusion here, what's next for you? You said that there's always these different stages of learning and things are always changing, of course. What are you seeing in your immediate or near future that is exciting you, that's getting your attention?
I think there's maybe one more book. I'm trying to write about the transition to energy work for body workers. I mean, that professional piece of it. I got this memoir that's exciting to me. Changing the program that I teach at the massage school is also given me some real hope for the future, because I was all set to kind of quit. I just got tired of teaching cranio. That's still important to me. And I figure, well, I'm going to give that a couple of years and then just see. I don't think I reasonably even can see beyond a kind of projection into the future. It's like having this little light and you can see a little bit ahead. But as Rebecca Solnit said, you have a tiny light and it lights the next step or two. But you can go all night with that light if you just don't get too far ahead of yourself. And that's kind of the state I'm in right now. I really find the individual work with individual students to be the best thing. And so I'm trying for more of that.
Well, we'd like to take a moment, of course, Jim, to thank you so much for joining us today, sharing something of your story and your knowledge with us.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. You can find us at fielddynamicshealing.com.